Hi, I'm Calum Thomson. I work in the Learning Teaching Enhancement Centre. And what I'm going to talk about today is a bit about sort of last year and the work that we did around how we in LTech respond almost sort of to support the university in response to AI. I'm probably one of the least technical speakers that's going to be here today because before maybe December 2022, didn't really know AI apart from, in sort of sci-fi films and things. So it took me by surprise, along with a lot of other people. What we're almost often tasked with in LTech is thinking about how sort of like external industry and government initiatives come together, how institutional policy comes into the university. We think about new technologies, we think about sort of societal changes, not to be too grand about it, but we think about what they mean in terms of how we design sort of learning, teaching, assessment, feedback, curriculum, and then how we support academics across the university to do that. So one of the points I think I want to make from the outset is a lot of what we've done is about how we guide sort of the masses in the university to engage with AI tools and support their students engaging with AI tools as well. And if I think back to last year, if we think to maybe January of last year, when ChatGPT started to become really big, there were lots of calls for things like ban it, okay? Let's sort of do away with it, let's block it from the institutional network. We don't want people using these tools, we don't trust them. And that's kind of difficult, It's a bit like saying, right, we need to ban water from the campus. It's everywhere, and as we've found, it's becoming sort of more and more prevalent all over the place. So we couldn't ban it. We looked at sort of how we might sort of write policy and sort of through QMO, they've looked at policy around academic misconduct and things and how we might write a policy around that or an institutional statement on our position. Can't really do that either. It's moving so quickly and it's emerging so quickly in so many different places that as soon as we're putting in one sort of position, if you like, we've moved on and it's different already. Thinking again, back over last year, we were looking at ChatGPT, the big sort of one in the media. What we found certainly in LTech was that, we almost got a head around ChatGPT and then AI tools started to pop up and lots of other tools that we're using as well. So we're sort of saying this isn't just sort of how do we use this AI tool, it's how do we actually manage use across a whole suite of tools where this is emergent. So that's what we were faced with last year. And we went through this sort of process of discussion with colleagues in the schools, with colleagues in other professional services about what we actually do around this. And where we got to was, initially we got to a point where we said, right, we need to write some sort of guiding principles that align our academic teaching and learning principles with AI tools. And we put that out as almost like a guiding sort of framework for reflection on what we're doing in teaching to sort of at least make a step towards that. Now, we very quickly had to flip around our position on that because what we found was we wrote these AI principles and then AI appeared in all of our educational technologies. So we said, right, actually we need to write something that talks about AI across of our educational technologies. So these 5 principles that I have on screen just now, I'm going to talk through these in a little bit of detail, briefly. These are our educational technology principles. And what we've done on the LTech Hub site is we've almost contextualize these in generative AI tools. So our 5 principles that we have are equitable access, student-centered learning, authenticity, academic integrity, and anticipatory use. And going back to the previous talk, this is really about trying to sort of prompt or give a framework for reflection on what responsible use of AI is in your area of teaching and learning and with your students. So, in terms of equitable access, this is something that we encounter a lot with new technologies that come along, where we see sort of useful new tools. We need to try and think about how we are designing that into teaching and learning in a way that all of our students have access to that in a way that is suitable to them. You may have students who are sort of studying AI specifically and working with specific bits of technology, and that's absolutely brilliant. Where at the other end of the spectrum, for example, we're doing a lot of work with health areas where there's not sort of a great deal of use on the front end of AI is, okay, so if we're using AI, what are the uses of that for these students and how do we use that in the design of teaching and learning and what access do we give to students with that? students that possibly need a bit of extra support in using these. They need someone at the end of a phone who can help them use this tool. So we're really pushing for people to consider what tools they're using with their students, what tools they are using, and considering things like data protection, considering things like student safety when they're working with these tools as well. And at that point, I will just highlight that LTech run lots of sessions on Microsoft Copilot just now. Please do come along. That's an institutionally provided tool. You can log in and you get a chat tool there that you can work with. The second principle that we have is about student-centered learning. And student-centered learning is something we talk about a lot in education. It's really about active learning, collaborative learning, about students being really central to the learning experience. They're constructing their own understanding. Where we're sort of moving to with this principle, though, is more thinking about human agency within the learning experience, more thinking about how students are using these tools in ways that are supportive of them, in ways that I think Sunil said earlier on, like accelerate learning and support them to learn, but doesn't sort of replace the learning process for them, sort of classically generating a piece of work to hand into the tutor, taking them out of that learning cycle. How do we build a culture of learning which promotes that for the students, really sort of looking for how they use it to help them and get ahead in life, get ahead in their learning, but not to make them feel like they are being replaced by this tool. Authenticity, again, another term we use a lot in education, but what does that mean in terms of generative AI? Again, in LTech, we're working with sort of disciplines across the university, a really wide range of disciplines with different engagement with technology more generally, but in particular with generative AI. So thinking about in the discipline that we're working within and in the relevant industry to that discipline, what does generative AI look like and what are the uses of that? How are people using it? Is it being used as a productivity tool to help us sort of write reports and to sort of analyze spreadsheets? Is it being used to sort of critique sort of health data, for example? There's lots of different uses of these, but sort of thinking about that and thinking about how we instill sort of behaviors and approaches to AI within the curriculum, which support students to develop those skills. The big one, academic integrity. Did anyone see that Glasgow they're in the news last week because they're going back to sort of like paper-based in-person exams because they've fallen out with all the students about it. This is a real problem in the sector. This is something that panics people quite a lot. We're giving students tools that can essentially write content. But what we need to think about, rather than being like, how do we stop students from using these tools in their assessment, how do they use it productively within their assessment? How do they use it to support them within their assessment in a way that will benefit them when they leave the university? So being aware of issues around plagiarism, around sort of misrepresentation of your own work, and rather think about, okay, so we need to respond to that, but how do we actually support students to have ideas and use generative AI tools to sort of build on these ideas, and then how do we recognize that work in their assessed work? And then the final principle is anticipatory. And I've said this a couple of times to people recently. This isn't about crystal ball work. Nobody's going to know what's happening in 6 months' time with AI. It's moving rapidly. There's a lot of new tools coming out. So really it's about thinking, how can we help students prepare for the world they're going into beyond the university to keep up with this rate of change? This is a massive, if we think, again, think back 12, 18 months, we're nowhere near where we are now. And we can see that moving on at the same rate. So when students leave us, how do they keep on top of those skills? So it's really about lifelong learning skills. It's about using AI tools to help you develop skills as you move on, but also sort of just having that approach of, we're not standing still with this, we're moving on with this, sort of building that through the curriculum. And then when students go off into the big bad world, they're prepared to engage with these tools in their industry.